Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. We're very fortunate to have the Secretary of the entire state of Louisiana, Jay Dardenne. Jay is going to talk about his duties and responsibilities as Secretary of State, the fact that he is focusing on trying to get folks to vote and also helping businesses do what they need to do with the Secretary of State. He's also going to talk about him running for the Lieutenant Governor for the state of Louisiana. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Secretary of State, Jay Dardenne. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today the Secretary of State for the entire state of Louisiana, Jay Dardenne. Jay, again, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Locke. Nice to be with you.
You've been all on the show several times. You've been all over the place in terms of politics, beginning at LSU, I think elected as president of the student body, now Secretary of State, and ultimately going to be running for Lieutenant Governor. I know we'll talk about that. But just tell the folks a little bit of history just to bring them up to speed.
Well, like you, I've practiced law most of my career since the early 1980s and ran for public office the first time in 1988 and got beat and came back and served on the Metro Council for several years and then spent 15 years in the State Senate, which was a wonderful and very interesting experience.
Long time.
And it was, and became Secretary of State in November of 2006 and re-elected in 2007.
In an overwhelming way, as I recall.
Well, I got 64% of the vote, which was a very nice result.
And I think it was 58 out of, what, 62 or 64 parishes in the state, and actually got more votes than Governor Gender.
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing. You know, it's interesting because you spent 15 years in the legislature, and you were there and actually held some very powerful positions that it seems like has prepared you for the position that you currently hold and the one that you're seeking. Tell the folks a little bit about that.
You see so many different things when you're in the legislature, obviously, and you get an opportunity to have to cast a lot of votes. There are two buttons, green and red. There's not a yellow, so you got to make a lot of decisions on what's best for the people of the state. And I was in a position to be able to do that during a very interesting time, serving under Governors Edwards, Foster, and Blanco. In differing roles, obviously.
Democrat, Republican, and Democrat.
That's right.
And you're a Republican?
I'm a Republican, and in a position where in my first term I was challenging a lot of the status quo during Governor Edwards' last term.
I actually read that you were a thorn in his side
I think I probably was. During the Foster administration, I was Governor Foster's floor leader on a lot of, I think, progressive legislation and great legislation for the state.
Tell us what that means to be the floor leader.
Well, it means you handle legislation that is being advocated by the governor.
So you're kind of like the point man.
You are. I handle, for example, legislation that created the community college system in Louisiana and established a Baton Rouge Community College, a lot of ethics reform that was underway during that administration, the motion picture tax credit legislation.
Which has turned into a huge deal.
It really has. It's been a tremendous economic boon for the state, and we knew it would be. We really felt like if we did that, it would put Louisiana in a position to compete with Hollywood, and it has. And
explain to the folks how it works. Basically, it's an enticement to the movie producers to come here and film their motion pictures here.
That's right, and it's multiple levels. It gives credits to folks who invest in movies, credits to the producers and the folks who are spending the money to hire Louisianians and to rent equipment and all the various and sundry.
And do all kinds of things because there's so many collateral businesses that are associated.
That's right. It creates a great deal of spin-off economic activity.
And the bottom line is, I guess the benefit of giving them credits where it basically reduces the amount of taxes they have to pay, the revenues generated far exceed that.
That's correct. And the result has been an explosion of movies being made in Louisiana since the early part of this decade, and now looking forward, there's a great deal of anticipation about a lot more great efforts coming throughout the state. And you know, Louisiana has a very rich history of movie making even before we had the tax credits. The very first Tarzan movie, 1918, was filmed in Franklin, Louisiana, in St. Mary Parish, which is an interesting story. And then over the years have been a lot of great movies, Steel Magnolias, and just a whole litany of movies.
It's such a beautiful state. I mean, it's great people and culture. So.
People love to come here, and that's what's important. They love the cuisine, they love the culture, they love the people, and when you layer on top of that an ability to save money and be economically sound, it's one of the primary reasons that Hollywood is latched on to Louisiana.
But well, I know one movie that my kids are particularly excited about. You're hearing about the Twilight sequel coming and being produced here. Amazing.
Yeah,
That's one of the most popular movies that ran last year.
It is, and there are a lot of movies like that on the horizon. Some of the blockbusters of the next couple of years have been filmed or are being filmed right now in the state. So that all had its genesis with the motion picture tax credit legislation dating back to the early part of the decade.
Which was your idea?
Well,
you spearheaded?
I handled the legislation. It was part of the initiative that the Foster administration had put together, and now Representative Steve Scalise and I handled the legislation. Steve in the House and I in the Senate, and it's had profound effects for Louisiana for the good.
What are the big things that occurred during that 15 years that you can look back in hindsight and say, that was a great thing?
Well, I think the establishment of the community college system was certainly one of the big things.
Because I know it's huge
that
now.
we did.
I mean, in Baton Rouge, BRCC is huge.
It is, and we restructured the power of the Board of Regents to regulate higher education, and that debate is taking place again right now about whether there ought to be a single board and the power that's vested in the Board of Regents relative to the management boards of the university. And a lot of the groundwork for that was laid in legislation that we passed during that particular time. So I was involved in a lot of legislation dealing with elections, dealing with ethics reform, dealing with education, dealing with health care, which kind of run the gamut when we were in the position I was in. And I was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee for a term as well, which gave me a good handle on trying to wrestle with this budget, which has grown exponentially since I was there. But trying to be fiscally conservative with the people's money and understand that we've got to set priorities in state government. That's kind of what I was trying to do.
And it's interesting because I had Dan Claytor, who's a state senator, indicating that, we had the Katrina monies come in, billions of dollars, because of the great tragedy of Katrina and Rita, but that money's running out, and we got budget problems again.
Well, the story of our life, really in our adult lifetimes in Louisiana's budget history, has been dependence on one-time sources of revenue. There was oil revenue during the great oil boom that would generate money for Louisiana that wasn't necessarily going to always recur, and we managed to spend it and unfortunately spend a lot of it away. We got great windfalls, unfortunately, as a result of Katrina with some federal dollars that came in. We used to get a lot of money from our Medicaid program, one-time federal dollars, and now most recently we've got these stimulus dollars that has come about as a result of the Obama administration. That's one-time money that is built into our operating budget of the state. For example, my budget in the Secretary of State's office has got about $20 million in stimulus money that is going to go away after next year.
Gosh.
That's going to have to be replaced, supplanted.
I guess stop services.
That's right. And we're going to have elections, obviously, next year that are going to have to be funded. So those are examples of windfalls that have come to the state, one-time windfalls that we have to be very careful that we don't build into our recurring budget.
Well, let's talk about you as the Secretary of State. Initially, you ran for, I believe you were finishing up the term of now deceased Fox McKithen, and you won, and then you ran again, was again, as we mentioned, elected with an overwhelming majority vote. Tell me about that. You've been there a while now.
Well, I've been there for what'll be about 4 years, and we've experienced a lot of changes. We've done a lot of things that we thought ought to be done differently, and we focused on elections, of course, because that's my prime responsibility as the chief elections officer for the state. And one of the things we wanted to accomplish was to increase access to voting for people, so that early voting has become a priority for us. And the legislature.
Explain to the folks what that means, early voting.
Early voting is what used to be called absentee voting, where you used to have to present a reason that you're not going to be there on election day so that you could absentee vote. We now have early voting in Louisiana, which is a week-long period that runs a Saturday through the following Saturday, 2 weeks before the election date, where you can go vote with no excuses. You can just show up and say, I want to vote now. And it's really, I think it's going to help drive voter turnout, improve voter turnout, and it's made it a lot more convenient for people to be able to participate in the process.
All right, let's continue that on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Secretary of State Jay Dardenne. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show Jay Dardenne. He's the Secretary of State for the entire state of Louisiana. Jay, again, thanks.
Thank you, Locke.
We're talking about basically what you faced as Secretary of State, and you were tackling kind of getting folks to the booth to vote.
Well, we were, and the early voting has been very successful, as I mentioned, and it's going to continue to be. We've created some remote sites in several parishes where people don't have to worry about parking downtown in congested areas. And we also were able to recruit a lot more people to be election commissioners. You know, we kind of take voting for granted. You go in and spend a couple of minutes in the voting booth and you go about your business, but there's a lot of preparation for weeks before an election to make sure it's pulled off successfully and with the integrity that we expect. Voting commissioners are a big part of that, and these folks are generally our senior citizens, spend the entire day
sitting at that little table, looking at your name, checking it off, and saying, "Get in there."
And we were able to increase the pay of those commissioners, which has enabled us to recruit a lot more people because we were struggling to get people to do that.
Really, no one wanted to. And talk to the folks why it's important to vote.
Well, that aspect of voting is a public service. People who do that, they get compensated, but they don't get compensated very much, and they're making possible what is the hallmark of American democracy, the right to vote.
I mean, it's a government representative of the people. The people have the power, and they exercise that power by voting for
That's
someone.
right, and it's always escaped me why people don't vote every chance they get, and why young people in particular are generally the smallest demographic group that participates because they have more power available to them than they know if they'll simply go participate.
Truly, Jay, I think of Iraq when those people were subjecting themselves to being killed and proudly sticking their finger in the ink and holding it up. And an overwhelming majority of folks voted.
Right.
And here we're lucky if we get 50%.
Well,
so.
that's right. It's our most precious right, and most people don't seem to want to take advantage of it. It's very frustrating to see these turnouts where we have literally single digits in these small turnout elections.
Explain it to the folks who want to register to vote what they have to do. Because
Well,
you made it really easy.
It's a very simple process. You can do it online. You can go to our website, which is GoVote, GEAUX vote.com. You can go to your local registrar of voters. And it's a very simple form that you fill out and you submit to register to vote. We've got a very high percentage of people registered to vote in Louisiana.
In fact, you can register when you're 17, right?
You can register when you're 17, but you can't vote, of course, until your 18th birthday, but you can register at 17. The registration process is simple. The registration process is effective, but people then have to be motivated to go participate in the process. And that's part of what we try and do is make sure people understand they have a right to do that. And we've try to take advantage of technology through our website to provide people with information. You can get instantaneous and accurate and quick results on elections on election night through our website.
In fact, we'll put that on the show.
Good, please do. And then we've expanded as you know, we've expanded our computer capabilities in our commercial division because businesses have to register in Louisiana to exist, and they have to re-register every year with their annual report. As of last fall, you can now transact that business online. So you can create a new entity online, you can file your annual reports online.
Don't necessarily have to have an attorney, do you?
No, you don't. It's a fairly simple process, right. and we've made it even easier. And in fact, in the first 6 months or so of this online filing capability, we've had more than 12,000 entities register to do business in Louisiana. So it's been very popular.
And you have a website for that called what?
Well, it's gobiz.com.
Okay, we're talking about the Cajun Go.
That's
G-E-A-U-X.
Right. They all link, G-E-A-U-X, B-I-Z, but they both link to our standard website. It's just easier and catchier, I think, to remember Go Vote and Go Biz than our governmental entity.
Okay. Let's talk about the museums, because I know you've been putting a lot of effort into one particular one.
Well, we have. We've created the Heroes and Heritage Trail to link the 17 museums that are operated by the Secretary of State's office, and we've given them a branded identity now. The old state capitol is the bell cow of our museum system, and we're very proud of it. We've invested several $1 million in exhibit redesign in that building through one-time surplus money from the state. And I was able to raise $1.1 million from the private sector.
So donations?
Through donations,
Fantastic.
Contributions of business entities that believe in that building. And we're going to unveil these new exhibits this summer. And it's going to be a very exciting place to visit. It always has been, but now it's got new life. And we've got a very special exhibit called The Ghost of the Castle that kids are not going to want to miss, where Sarah Morgan, who is the spirit that we think looks over that castle. Her family donated the land on which the building was built, and she watched it burn and be occupied by the Union Army during the Civil War, and she kept a diary.
Wow.
Very well written diary.
And that diary's there?
The replica of the diary is there, but the Ghost of the Castle exhibit is a very exciting, high-tech, Hollywood-type exhibit that talks about the very interesting history of that building through the eyes of our ghost, Sarah Morgan.
Interesting. And when is it going to open?
It's going to open in 1st of July.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's talk about the fact that you now want to run for lieutenant governor. Explain to the folks why you want to run.
Well, I'll be running for lieutenant governor in the election this fall to fill the unexpired term of Mitch Landrieu, and it's really an extension of the work I'm doing now. The lieutenant governor is responsible for promoting our state and for managing the tourism budget that's allocated to the state of Louisiana, and it's a very important position, and we need to have someone in that position who will be accountable to the people for how those dollars are spent, to make certain that we get the kind of results that we expect from promoting our state. And Lieutenant Governor, of course, is also the person who would become governor in the event that the governor's office is vacated.
In one breath.
That's right.
Can become governor. Let's talk about, I know Governor Jindal had actually talked about wanting to abolish it to try and save money, and you opposed that. Explain why.
I did, and it's one of the few things that I disagreed with the governor on, but I feel like this position has value. Had the office been eliminated, the Secretary of State would have been next in line.
So you had kind of nothing to gain from it.
Well, that's right. I could have sat back and said, let the Secretary of State move in.
Because I'm second in line.
Yeah, but I think this position is important. I think one person needs to be responsible for managing a tourism budget and for being accountable on how it's going to be spent, to rebrand Louisiana, give it an identity that is going to make it even more attractive in the eyes of people who are outside Louisiana. Those of us who live here, and we're the happiest state in America, incidentally, according to a poll that Science Magazine took, which is very interesting. But Louisianians love their state, and we appreciate the diverse culture and the history, the beauty of our state, our cuisine, and people outside of Louisiana love it as well. But they also get to see, unfortunately, a lot of the downside of Louisiana. They question our purported political corruption that has existed in this state. They worry about hurricanes. They look at the education system, and we've got to have somebody who knows and understands how to promote everything that's good about Louisiana, to make certain that we continue attracting people from outside Louisiana, because the first way to get people to invest in our state is to get them to visit our state and appreciate everything that's special, and that's an expertise that I think I've developed.
Well, it's interesting because in your role as Secretary of State, you have managed museums. You've got jurisdiction over a number of museums, not just the old state capitol, and you've been in relationship with businesses that you want to bring to the state. And really, it seems like those two hats are really also part of the roles of the Lieutenant Governor.
Well, they are, and there are a lot of similarities between the functions that we have from a commercial standpoint and a promotional standpoint in the Secretary of State's office. The big difference is that in the Lieutenant Governor's office, you're managing the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. You're promoting state parks and historic sites and museums, and you're authorizing the expenditure of tourism dollars.
Let's talk about that on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with the Secretary of State for the State of Louisiana, Jay Dardenne. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show today Jay Dardenne. He's the Secretary of State for the entire state of Louisiana, and he's running for Lieutenant Governor. Again, Jay, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Locke.
We're talking about why you wanted to run for Lieutenant Governor and how basically your role as being a legislator for 15 years in Louisiana, as being Secretary of State for 4 years, now really kind of pushes right into the position of Lieutenant Governor. And you've talked about the duties. It sounds like when I'm hearing it that you're really the chief salesman or salesperson for the state, to other states, to other individuals, and to other countries.
Well, that's right, Locke, and you are by definition the ambassador for Louisiana and trying to sell the state, attracting tourists to the state, and eventually, hopefully, businesses to the state, representing all that's good about Louisiana. So there's clearly a salesmanship component to it, an ambassador component to it, a management component from the standpoint of the millions of dollars that we spend on tourism in Louisiana, particularly on marketing and advertising, which is where I think we need to invest our dollars, particularly in the wake of the oil spill and the kind of things that have happened to threaten our coast and to threaten people's perception about whether Louisiana is a good place to visit. We need to make certain that we're investing those dollars in media and in messages that are going to reach people and bring them to the state.
Well, let's talk about that. What, if you're elected as lieutenant governor, what is it that you want to do in addition to what's being done, or what do you want to change? What are you going to do?
There's pretty solid data that reflects that for every dollar you spend on advertising and marketing tourism in a state, in our state, you're going to yield $17 back. So it's a very good return on investment, and we need to be smart in how we spend that money. We need to make certain that we get that message, that advertising message out to people elsewhere in other states, and particularly in our neighboring states, trying to bring them to Louisiana to appreciate the great cuisine, the incredible paradise that we have from a sporting standpoint, and to see and appreciate the museums and the historical sites, the recreational areas that we somewhat take for granted because it's in our own backyard. So I want to make certain those dollars are spent, that we can be accountable for them and we can show a return on that investment.
What is the source of that money? Does that come from the legislature?
That's from the state.
It's part of the budget?
It's from the state general fund, as well as a dedicated amount of money that comes from hotel motel revenue that is pushed right back into advertising. That's a dedicated, statutory dedicated fund.
It would seem that businesses, in addition to those, would want to contribute to that. Is there a way that that happens?
Well, it's basically through the tax dollars, and
Okay.
It's part of the budget, and it's part of the prioritization that has to take place at the legislature as to how much money ought to be invested in something that's going to give you a return on investment. So part of the mission of what I would have to do is make certain I'm accountable for how that money is spent, responsible for how it's spent, and can then convince the governor and the legislature that it's a viable investment of tax dollars.
Well, it's interesting because of all the positions you've held over the last 20 or 30 years. You've got a lot
Not
of
30, don't make me that long.
Okay, 20 years. I know you've got a lot of relationships, and you've got a unique kind of appreciation of the history. I think you've got kind of a little spill that you give to folks occasionally. But tell me about that.
I developed a presentation called "Why Louisiana Ain't Mississippi" that is a
Why Louisiana Ain't Mississippi.
It's a grammatically incorrect.
I'm not thinking that's going to help get Mississippi guys here.
Well, you know, it's funny because it sounds like it's a put down on Mississippi, which it's not. I could really have substituted any other state in America for Mississippi. The point is Louisiana is unlike any other state in America. And that's the point of the presentation. Louisiana's history, demography, politics, culture, literature, music, everything that makes Louisiana special. And I enjoy talking about it in I hope a relatively entertaining way that makes people appreciate everything that's special about Louisiana. And an offshoot of that presentation has been a number of talks that I give to civic groups around the state about Louisiana politics and about books and music that have been written by Louisianians, performed by Louisianians, to help us appreciate the very unique lifestyle and culture that sets Louisiana apart from every other state.
Jay, it's interesting. I was reading about the history of the lieutenant governor, and in fact, Earl Long was actually a lieutenant governor, and there have been several other folks who ultimately went on to hold position of governor. Do you give the folks a little bit about that history?
You know, we used to elect our statewide elected officials on tickets. You'd run on a ticket and you'd basically vote for the entire group of people and they would be elected. We don't do that anymore. Lieutenant governor for years was the presiding officer in the Louisiana State Senate.
So he was in charge of the state Senate?
He presided over the actions of the state Senate and appointed committees and what have you. That all changed with the Constitution back 30 years or so ago, and before then there was a gravitation away from that. The lieutenant,
do you know why?
A variety of reasons. The Senate wanted to be independent and elect its own leader. Political reasons, I think, played into it as well, but that responsibility was taken away from the lieutenant governor, and the Constitution now provides that the lieutenant governor will have whatever functions are delegated by the governor. So actually the governor can direct the lieutenant governor to do whatever he pleases. If you have a governor and a lieutenant governor who are of the same party, who are of a like mind, it seems to me there's a lot that a lieutenant governor could do to support,
literally be a lieutenant,
and help a governor, which is certainly something I would like to see done in the current situation, and something I'm going to propose be done so that the lieutenant governor can actually help the sitting governor be successful with his agenda.
So one of the things that you would seek is whoever's governor, more specific instructions and authority given to you to help spearhead certain events?
I'd like to do more, not less, and I'd like to do more with less. And it's part of what I think I can do in the Lieutenant Governor's office is make better use of the money that's allocated to be expended by the Lieutenant Governor. Because now the Lieutenant Governor is also the head of the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. By statute, the Lieutenant Governor presides over the actions of that department. But that doesn't mean that's all that the Lieutenant Governor's got to do. And I want to bring a lot of energy to that department and try and do even more, but I also want to make certain that we maximize the return on the investment of dollars spent to promote Louisiana.
And I think, in fact, the Constitution provides that you're an ex officio for every committee, board, commission that the governor can sit on or serve on.
That's right. And in particular, for example, Lieutenant Governor, like the Secretary of State, serves on the Bond Commission, which is something I've taken very seriously as Secretary of State because that is one of the most unheralded and most important functions of state government is the State Bond Commission that has to approve all of the borrowing that takes place for state government to float bonds for local government.
In other words, borrow money from somebody. To
invest in capital improvements all across the state. And the Bond Commission wields an awful lot of authority and an awful lot of power dealing with how a lot of tax dollars are going to be spent to improve the infrastructure of Louisiana. And I've personally been involved in that rather than sending a delegate. Usually I try and go if I can. And I've been there most of the meetings since I've been Secretary of State. I intend to do the same thing as Lieutenant Governor because I think that's a very important position.
Well, in essence, you're involved in negotiating, I guess, the price that you're going to have to pay when you borrow money.
Well, the Treasurer's Office is responsible primarily for making sure those negotiations take place, but the Bond Commission has to ultimately vote on what happens.
As I understand it, the Governor General appointed Mr. Angel, who is Director of the Department of Natural Resources, but he's only there for, I guess, just a few more months.
That's right. He was appointed basically in May and will serve until his successor is elected, and that election is going to be this fall. So Scott will be there for about a 5 or 6 month period.
Jay, thank you so much for being on the show. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, the Secretary of State Jay Dardenne. Thanks for being with us.